So today we're going to be talking about how to become a better podcast host. So you're a newbie podcaster, or you started a podcast, or you're trying to transition from your solo podcast, and now let's say you're in your new season and now you're having guests in your podcast. So this is more focused on that. So your guest has confirmed that they're going to be recording with you. Then you will have to start your preparations, right? The standard preparation of you need to research a lot about your guest, what they do, what they do best. Next thing to do is, okay, now the guest is in, you're now about to record, or you're in the call. So before you press the record button, make the guest feel as comfortable as possible. So if you've had a podcast guesting experience, I think it would be easier for you to reference, like, oh, this podcaster made me this comfortable. Oh, this podcaster or that podcaster did something different. You may consider copying those things in order to make your guest feel welcome. Consider having small talk as well. They may say some things that are interesting that you can take note of, that may be related to your topic that you're going to be talking about in your podcast episode. You can note that down and use that thing they said as in reference to that, like, hey, you said something about this or that. Can you talk more about that? Can you expound more about these things that we talked about before we recorded? And then they will answer, right? Also consider explaining your process before you press the record button. Now, there are two ways to do this. You may send this to them via email, like an overview of how you do your process. Like, you record, takes X number of days for you to edit the podcast. Or if you're having a seasonal type wherein we just record, and then we publish once the next season is launched. If you have a weekly podcast or a bi-monthly podcast, then you can inform the podcast guest, like, okay, this particular episode that we're doing will be published in this date. Or you can just let them know that, oh, we'll send you an email to inform you that, hey, we just published this, and maybe we can also share assets for you to promote to your own social media platforms and your audience. So the best podcast, in my opinion, is that it feels like a conversation that you're listening as friends. So take the time to get comfortable, build that rapport before hitting the record button. In this particular case, small talk does matter. Now you've pressed the record button. So now you have to introduce your guest. A typical thing that newbies does is that they prepare a script, sort of, and they read from the script. And it's usually so long, right? So don't spend 5-10 minutes introducing your guest. Like, most likely the audience or whoever's watching, they can just Google them, right? So my tip for this one is that I let the guest talk, or I let the guest share their credentials. Now, share their background, right? Because I think typically when they do that, they're far more comfortable, far more confident when saying that, rather than you listing down all the accomplishments that you've found online. And it can make them blush, sure, can be flattery, but it deviates from making the guest comfortable. They're starting to get uncomfortable for some, but not all would feel that way. But sure, I think the best bet is to let them introduce themselves. Then the next step is, I typically follow a simple structure that is past, present, and then future. So that's the structure: past, present, and future. So your questions will be divided into these three categories of sorts. So you have the past type of questions, you have the present questions, and the future questions. So the past questions is quite simple, right? Like, how did you get started? That's one, right? Or you can reframe or paraphrase it as like, what is your origin story? It's another way to ask that question. And then another one would be like, oh, you have so many accomplishments that you've done in your career, in your business, in your life. So what do you believe to be your biggest accomplishment so far? Another question about the past would be like, asking about their parents, like, oh, you're an entrepreneur, you're a serial entrepreneur, for example. And did you have that background? Were you in that sort of environment? Did your parents raise you to be an entrepreneur, or were they entrepreneurs themselves? What did your parents do? Something like that. Yeah, there should be more questions out there, but yeah, that's just the basic questions. Next is the present, right? Present type of questions is typically what they are currently doing. Like what's their current project? What's their current business that they're focusing on? Did they recently launch a new business, for example? Right? So what keeps you busy these days? Or you can go the opposite route, or you can go use this. It's not your usual question. Is what are the things you're not good at? And then another one would be like more getting to know you question, but focus on the present, which is what are the things about you that actually surprise people? Right? That's a nice question. Yeah. Now after that, we go to the future, right? Future related questions. So could be, what are your plans for the near future with regards to your business, or what are your immediate plans for this or that, or do you have anything that you're currently trying to launch? That sort of question. So that's a question about something about the future. Or you could go on the trends type of route, wherein what sort of trends do you see in the near future for this particular industry in the next 5-10 years or so? There could be a very long answer to that question, but yeah, it's a question about the future. So you can pretty much do your research and try to find a question that matches the past, the present, and the future. Next tip I would give is listening tips, right? So I would say these are the little things, listening tips. The primary tip would be, of course, you need to practice active listening, because when you're the host, you need to listen to what the guest is talking about for you to throw a counter question or a clarification question. Or if you're genuinely interested in what they're doing, then you would have to be listening closely to them, right? But sometimes this is more of the subconscious part of our behavior, of our brain, wherein there's this one incident, not really incident. So when you're involved in the podcast marketing space, or when you're doing podcasts for clients, sometimes I would be the platform host. I will be the one on the backstage of, let's say, your Riverside recording or your Squadcast. I will not show up on the screen, but I'm there. And sometimes it could either be the guest or the host that does this, but when someone's so intent on, there's such a thing as like super active listening, wherein they're listening to you, but they're staring you down like this. Like, yeah, like I agree. But at the same time, when you're constantly like this, you're constantly looking at the camera, it can get creepy, right? So yeah, don't do that. Like when you're editing the episode, especially if you have a video podcast, then yeah, that becomes an issue. If you're in an audio podcast, I guess doesn't matter, right? Because it's just a voice, right? But when you're in a video podcast and you're just staring like this into the camera, that could make the guest uncomfortable. That could also definitely make the audience, the watchers, uncomfortable. So there is that. So that's one thing. Don't stare down your guest or the audience, right? You can just glance. Another thing would be like, you need to practice changing positions while listening. It's a little thing. It's these little things, right? Changing your position while listening, like this, like yeah. Or if you have a mic, you can grab your mic depending on how your mic is configured, like this. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. You need to be still comfortable, right? So it's a delicate balance of movement, because you can't be like this all throughout the podcast. It makes you look so stiff. You're not even moving, right? I would say people would think like, oh, is this an AI person? Because they're just like that all throughout the episode, not moving at all. So there's a way, like, you should relax while still, in that active listening state. Another tip would be, you must learn how to be comfortable with silence, right? Silence in the sense that you have to be comfortable for the guest to be silent before the answer, because they're thinking, they're gathering their thoughts. The same is true for you. If a guest would sometimes throw you a question, just think about it. Don't be afraid to think about it and gather your thoughts, and don't just immediately answer without thinking. Of course, yes, it is okay to pause, take a moment, especially if you're emphasizing something very specific. And if you're worried that your pause is too long, don't worry about it, because that's what the post editing is for. That's why you have an editor, to decide how long is too long, how short is too short. They can just cut it out and make it sound and look better once it is edited. Now, as far as like noises in the background, I think there was a time in podcasting space where everything needs to be clean and crisp, high production. But once in the video podcasting space, like, it's more talking head, like this, right? Like the overproduced branding type of deal it's no longer attractive, I would say. Even the noises, like ambient noises or some noises about, like, let's say your dog making noise, like barking, or your cat, or if you're from where I'm from, it could be there's a rooster making noise on the background, right? I think that adds to charm of the podcast, but it's just my opinion, right? Makes it more real, especially in the age of AI, right? In the age of there's all this AI stuff and AI influencers and recording, things like that. So I think that makes it real. Please let them interrupt, I would say, because for some people those are their favorite moments in the podcast. This is a real person right there. So that's about it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed and learned something from this. Hope you apply these tips in your own podcasting journey in the future, and thank you so much for watching.